So let's look at the other side, the market system, capitalism. Now remember, there is no total capitalism or total socialism. There is a mixed system. But what we're going to be looking at now is, what does a mostly capitalist system look like? Now, go back to this sheet here, because what we're going to do is we're going to fill out the bottom part of this first. Because through the rest of our macroeconomics class, we're going to be talking about the United States. Now, we will bring in the rest of the world, but our focus is going to be on the United States because, hey, we live here. Okay? So, the 6 characteristics of capitalism start out with private property. This literally is the foundation of capitalism. The more that we, the people, control the resources rather than the government controlling the resources, the better it is for us as far as capitalism is concerned. Now, with this in place, I can obtain, control, use, and dispose of anything I want. I can bequeath or inherit. That means if I die, I can give my stuff away. And if somebody gives me something that died, I can take it. That's the inherit part. And I can negotiate contracts because I own the stuff. The government doesn't. So I can go ahead and control all of my stuff. Now this bequeath and inherit part. This was an interesting thing that back in the 1990s, late 1990s, we came up with this idea of, well, rich people die. They can't take the money with them, so maybe they should go ahead and give it back to we the people. Through the government, of course. This is what was normally termed the death tax. And it has since been repealed in some places, and in some places it's still there. So I just want to give you an idea of what the death tax is and how it works. Well, first off, when it first came into play, if you made over $1.4 million, you could go ahead and give that $1.4 million to anybody you wanted, no strings attached other than taxes. But everything over $1.4 million, you had to pay the government 55 cents of every dollar. Or in other words, if you had another $100 million, you'd have to give the government $55 million, and then you could do whatever you wanted with that $45 million. All right, you know, inheriting it or bequeathing it and all that kind of stuff. So here's, I mean, it sounded good. I mean, you know, the people, you know, are getting the money and that kind of stuff, but wait a minute. What happened to the family of the rich guy? Well, let's take a look at the Joe Robbie family. All right, for those of you that don't know, Joe Robbie owned the original Miami Dolphins. I mean, he owned it through the perfect season and all that kind of stuff. So here is Joe Robbie. Very successful, a lot of money in real estate basically. Owns the team, owns the stadium, owns a whole bunch of other stuff. And he dies just after the death tax was put into play. Well, nobody really actually prepared for it. So what happened was, you know, the Robbie family's there at the funeral. They go ahead and get, our condolences. By the way, you owe us some odd, $1 million. And the family's going nuts. We don't have that cash. The team is worth this much. The stadium is worth this much. The other real estate is worth this much. We don't have that cash to go ahead and do that. That's why the Joe Robbie family no longer has controlling interest of the Dolphins or the stadium. They had to sell them to raise the money to pay the taxes. Okay? Let me say it one more time. Sold the team, sold the stadium that they didn't want to, just to pay the taxes. But it gets better. Because after that, Steve Forbes Sr., not Jr., he's the guy that's running around now, but Steve Forbes Sr. scratched his head and looked around and said, wow, I don't want that to happen to Jr. I want to make sure Jr. gets all my money, or all my wealth. And so he goes ahead and gets all his lawyers together and says, make it happen. And they come back and they go, yep, here's how you do it. you insure yourself for all the money you're going to have to pay the government. It says make it happen. They do. So senior dies. Junior's at the funeral. Our condolences. By the way, you owe us some odd $1 billion. And Junior goes, yeah, here you go. Let's over to accounts payable. Send it to the insurance company. Have them pay it. Now, here's the thing. Remember, the death tax was supposed to be for we the people. The money that the rich folks can't take with them is divided amongst us. So the insurance company has to pay off a really big claim. Now, where does the insurance company get the money to recover from that claim they just paid? Because remember, insurance companies have to make a profit. Revenue minus cost. The cost is having to pay a claim. Where are they getting the revenue from? Yeah, go ahead and say from you, from all of us. Because premiums on all of those things go up, don't they? We have a bad hurricane season, premiums go up. So here's where we start taking a look at the long term that we don't normally see at the front. The long term problem is the very people it's supposed to help end up having more of their money taken away from them because of the premiums they're now having to pay more of. And don't forget, remember that picture we showed of the Affordable Care Act? All that government that was up there? When you put in the death tax, you had to have a whole bunch of government to administer that before it got to we the people. And we don't even know where that money actually goes to. So, private property, foundation of capitalism. The death tax going away is a good thing because now we can do with our money what we want, not what the government thinks we should do. Okay. Now, here's another thing with private property. What if I had a printing business that I ran out of my garage? At the end of the month, I go ahead and I've got all this excess, icky, yucky, used up ink and stuff. What do I do with it? Well, seeing as how I can dispose of it any way I want, I decide to dump it in your property. Do you think you would have a problem with that? We'll get back to that. Number 2, freedom of choice and enterprise. Basically means any individual, so we call this the individual force, can become an entrepreneur. You can start your own company. You can become an employee. You can work for anybody you want that wants to pay you. And you can buy and sell what you want. This is what we mean by freedom of choice and enterprise. Now, buy and sell anything you want. Let's assume we're in a classroom and I have one of the students who stays after. Everybody else goes outside. Classroom's over, he comes out, one of you hits him over the head, we all stuff him in a burlap bag, we put him in the back of my SUV, we drive him to Jacksport, and we sell him to the first ship leaving port, and we each pocket $5,000 each. If you're one of the ones getting the $5,000, you might go, yeah, that's good. But what if you were the one that was in the burlap bag? Do you think you might have a problem with this? We'll get back to that later. All right, self-interest. Self-interest is the driving force of capitalism, which means it has to do with profit. Now, for those of you taking microeconomics, you need to remember these others. Those that are taking macro, don't worry about them. We have a couple of ways we talk about profit. One is economic profit. The other is implicit cost and explicit cost. And we'll get to those a little bit later. Now, you can work extra and assume you're going to get a bonus. But what if the boss says, no, you're not getting a bonus? You just work that extra stuff or you get fired. I don't care about profit. Okay? You might have a problem with that. Okay? Wait a minute, if I'm not making profit, if I'm not making more money, why should I do it? I'm going to fire you. Well, that could be a problem, and we'll get back to that. Now, competition. Competition is actually the controlling mechanism. All right? This is where we start making sure that we have more than one company. We have to have a large number of sellers, a large number of buyers. This is why we need a large number of sellers. The more sellers we have, the more competition. If Samsung goes ahead and charges $10 for something that Google charges $8 and Apple charges $6, we're buying the Apple stuff. But we want to make sure we have a large number of sellers, because if Microsoft eats Nokia and then Samsung eats Microsoft, and all of a sudden we only have one big fish, Google, left over in the pond, Google can now charge anything they want. So we make sure we have competition. Large number of buyers, and we need to get in and out of the market easy. Now, the concept of gobbling up the competition and making only one company could be a problem, which we'll get back to in a little bit. Now, lastly, we have markets. This actually is the coordinating system. This answers those 5 questions that we talked about in the beginning of the chapter. What do we make? How do we make it? Who gets it? How do we change? How do we go ahead and motivate the change? Right? Those 5 questions are answered by the markets. This is supply and demand, which means it's the invisible hand in here. Right? The invisible hand ensures the right mix. The invisible hand ensures a better and a more efficient way of doing it, because remember when we had the corn and the customers? If we had leftover corn, we're not efficient. And nobody told us to lower the price and decrease production other than ourselves, because we saw people weren't buying it. And when we didn't have any, we saw people coming in with money going, I want it, I want it, I want it. Nobody told us to make more. We saw the customers wanted more. They were going to pay enough for us to make a profit, so we made more for them. The invisible hand, the best way that makes markets run. Now, government regulations are kind of like frogs in a pan. Okay? And Spain, Greece, Italy, Portugal, they're going ahead and heading more towards that socialist end, and we keep thinking about doing that. Well, the thing about frogs in the water, remember if you throw them in a boiling pot of water, they'll jump right out. But if you put them in nice cool water and you just tick it a little bit, just increase the temperature a little bit, or just put a little regulation there, and then next year it's another little regulation, and then next year it's another little regulation, all of a sudden you find out you're dead because the boiling water is now really boiling, and that's it. So you do it a little step at a time. Laws and regulations can kill the invisible hand because it prevents it from doing its job. It puts in basically market ceilings and floors. So this can be a problem in overall economy, over-regulation. Now, we have these problems. So you can see there are problems that can sneak up in here. This is where government's role comes in. Remember we talked about, here's our 6th characteristic, government's role. It's the legal mechanism to protect our rights. It's supposed to be limited, looking at the best interest of the consumer. Protection to make sure this doesn't happen. Protect our private property. I can't dump my waste into your yard. Why? Because there's a law that says I can't, because that's your private property. I can do what I want with mine, but I can't infringe on yours. Freedoms. Hey, I can't do that kind of stuff, which by the way, if you didn't know, that was called Shanghai, and it was an extremely lucrative business in whaling ports in the 1890s, 1900s. A boss can't tell me to go ahead and work without pay, right? There's rules against that. Competition. This is what we want to make sure that we don't have a monopoly. And in microeconomics, we'll talk more about that kind of stuff. But the government makes sure that we don't have somebody that just takes over the whole industry and then can charge whatever they want. And make sure that the markets operate the way they're supposed to. Get rid of regulations and stuff, not add more to it. So that's the concept. Government's basically the referee. As long as we do this, individual forces there, the freedom is there, self-interest, competition, markets, all of that is in play, we can get in easily and out. Difference between the two: government decides what we buy and sell, we decide what we buy and sell. Quota driven, profit driven. Easy entry, easy exit, or no easy entry, no easy exit. Government's choice, our choice. Now, let's talk about this easy exit and entry for a minute. Because remember, we had that 5-year plan? So let's make it personal. Right? Those of you, Michael Vick was a super quarterback in college. He went up to Texas Tech, and then he came into the NFL and went to the Atlanta Falcons, and he was all of a sudden the best quarterback ever. And if, let's say, you're selling sports t-shirts, and you're in Atlanta, what kind of a sports t-shirt are you going to sell? Yep, Michael Vick, Atlanta Falcons t-shirts. Now, after he was there for a little bit, he had a bit of a problem. He was arrested for dog fighting and went to prison, spent 18 months there. If you're on the 5-year plan, year 1, you're making Michael Vick t-shirts, and he's playing his heart out. Year 2 and half of year 3, you're making Michael Vick Atlanta Falcon t-shirts. Why? Because it's year 2 and 3 of the 5-year plan. You can't change. All right, now he comes out, he did his time, he paid his price, everything else. One team goes ahead and allows him to get back into football, the Philadelphia Eagles. And all of a sudden, he's in there, and bang, he's MVP of the league. He's the superstar again. This is year 4, going into year 5 of the 5-year plan. He's with the Philadelphia Eagles, the biggest thing since sliced bread, and you're still making Atlanta Falcon Michael Vick t-shirts. That's the difference between a 5-year plan. In other words, no easy entry or no easy exit, and us. All right. Now, historically, socialism has never worked. Capitalism not only has historically worked, it improved standard of living, created a middle class. So we got rid of the 1% and the 99%. Opportunity for everybody from making nothing to making everything. USA, Hong Kong, and the Asia Tigers were the bigger ones to come up with to go ahead and show this to be a fact and true in the real world today. All right, so your worksheet should look like that. And I want you to go ahead and grab out the last handout. Let me take a quick look here. Now, this is the circular flow diagram. Now, I know in your textbook, and I keep having questions on this, I don't quite understand it, mostly because it's incomplete. What I like to do is I like to go ahead and talk to you about 4 baseball teams playing in 3 fields. So I want you to go ahead and think about that. Our first team, households, that's us. We're the ones that buy the stuff. This is where demand comes from. Remember, here's our consumers. Second team, businesses. These are the makers of all of our stuff. Notice there's our production possibilities curve. And GDP, when we go into macroeconomics, also comes from that block. Our third team, the rest of the world, or what they call the foreign sector. We'll get a comparative advantage when we talk about trade, but GDP from the rest of the world falls into that place. And our last team, government. But remember, in capitalism, best interest of the consumer, we're looking to protect our rights and the characteristics of capitalism. So we got our 4 teams. Now let's take a look at the stadiums they play in. The first one is the product market. This is where the households, we the people, head over to the product market, and businesses bring their products to us, and we exchange money for a product. Now, an example could be Walmart. An example could be the internet. What about the guy that's on the beach, has his trench coat and does, "Hurrah!" and has a whole bunch of watches to sell? The rest of you get your minds out of the gutter. Okay? Anywhere that we're exchanging things is a market. And in this case, the product market is coming from business to the household. Our next field is the resource market. Businesses, to make stuff, have to buy land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurial ability. Resources. Remember, in capitalism, households own all those resources. So businesses have to go through the resource market to buy the stuff from households. And our last market is the capital market. Now, this actually is money run by the Federal Reserve, and we'll get more onto that later as far as we go into macroeconomics. So, our players are fields. Now, how do they connect up? Well, first off, down in the lower left, any line on here that is totally filled in is the flow of money. Now, remember that old phrase, if you want to know what's important, follow the money. All right? So anything through here is money. The dashed lines can be one of three things. First is the flow of goods and services. A good being something you can hold on to, like bottled water. A service, something that somebody provides for you. You go to the doctor and you go, "I don't feel well," and they try to make you better. So it can be the flow of goods and services, or factors of production. In other words, here's things that are put together to make things, factors of production. That's that middle part of our production process model. And then, of course, resources, labor, capital, land, and entrepreneurial ability. So it could be one of three things, and I'll show you how they break out here shortly. Because the first thing we're going to do is, remember, because demand comes from households, households show that they have money. They want something. They're at the door looking for corn. Businesses go, "Wow, I've got a little bit of corn, so I'll sell that." So consumption spending comes here, and then it becomes revenue going into the business. All right? Now, here's where the cost comes from. Because to make that stuff, we need to go ahead and buy some resources. So we go to the resource market, and we give money to the households, which becomes income to the households. So here's income, and here's spending of the households. That's where the money goes. Now, if the business is going to give us money, obviously we need to go to work. So, on this side of the resource market, we have resources. Right? Resources. Entrepreneurship, land, labor, and capital. That's on this side. Now, if a business buys those and brings them into the business, we call it a factor of production. Now, let me give you an example. Let's assume we're sitting in a classroom and we got a whole class right here. All of you are labor. You're over here. You are labor. I hire this half of the classroom. This half of the classroom now is coming to work and making stuff. You are now called factors of production. The rest of you, you're unemployed labor. So until somebody else fires you, you're unemployed. You are still the labor resource, but you are looking for work. Now, that's the difference between resources and factors of production. The rest of this has to do with goods and services. We make the stuff, it comes to the product market. It's now sitting on the shelf in Walmart. We come, we buy it, it now goes home, it's a consumer product. Now, there's two things here. Notice this one says final and intermediate goods and services. This says final goods and services. We'll get to that later. Right now, this is what your sheet should look like. You need to make sure you understand this basic circular flow diagram really well. If you still have questions on it, let me know. Right? And you'll notice, of course, the capital market, the rest of the world, and the government we still don't have any ties to yet. We'll get to that in a little while. So again, if you have questions, go ahead and get with me on it. Market failures of capitalism come into this play. 3 of the biggest market failures: public goods, externalities, and what they call asymmetric information. All this is public goods, that stuff that the government buys that everybody in the United States is using. Now, we don't use the military as we'll go fly the plane, but the military there is to protect us. The police force are there to protect us. The EMTs are there to bring us back to life when we do something stupid. The fire department makes sure that when we burn something on the stove and start burning the house down, that they put the fire out. Right? This is all what we call public goods because everybody gets to use it. Externalities. These are things that happen outside of the basic, I want to buy it and you want to sell it. So let's take a look at that for a second. All right? We call these, it's kind of like the spillover effect. Here's the producer, I've got it. Here's the supplier, I want to buy it. All right, our supply and demand model there. We're doing the exchange, that kind of stuff. But when we talk about externalities, we're talking about something that is outside of this process. Such as, if I'm buying paper, it has to come from a paper mill. You ever live near a paper mill? Well, this is where the third party comes in. Because if you live near a paper mill, you smell this rotten egg smell forever. And there are probably some medical problems that go with that if you're smelling that stuff coming out of the paper mill for decades. So the third party might get some additional medical costs, but they had nothing to do with making the paper or buying the paper. Right? If you remember the movie Aaron Brockovich, this had to do with a plant was making stuff for everybody, and people were buying the stuff from the plant, but the people living around it were getting contaminated by the groundwater and having severe cancer problems. Because the water that they took out of the plant that was supposed to stay in a retention pond was actually seeping into the groundwater, and those people were dying. And they came through and went ahead and at least got some restitution for the people and stopped the company from doing that stuff. So medical costs can be a big problem. There's also a spillover benefit. Vaccinations. They're free. Get a coupon. They're free. So we have a negative cost with a spillover, and we have a benefit of the spillover. So all of these kind of put into place, and it doesn't have to do with the actual production and sale. For the vaccine, the kid didn't produce it, the family didn't produce it, and they didn't buy it. The government provided it. So we have spillover benefits and spillover costs. Now, if we have negative the spillover costs, we got some ways we can resolve that. And if we have some spillover benefits that might cause market failures, we can go ahead and take a look at that too. These are the problems: overproduction, underproduction. Either one is just like our corn and our customers. Overproduction, no customers, a lot of corn. Underproduction, customers, no corn. Those don't work very well. So we take a look at how to do that and make it happen. All right, that asymmetric information. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff here, and this is all in the book. Basically what it's saying is somebody knows more information than you do. We make decisions based on information. if the buyer doesn't know a lot about the seller can go ahead and sell them a lemon, for a car. Remember that buyer beware of the seller. Right? Of course, the seller might not know a lot of information of the buyers, and then the buyers can go ahead and get more money from the businesses than the businesses should. And then, of course, there's some qualifications for this. This is when we talk about, well, what's actually in the warranty. Do you ever read that? I mean, seriously, do you take a look at everything that's in that warranty? No, we don't. Because, oh, I got a warranty. And then when you try to use it, you find out, well, Section 17, Clause A, subsection 1, subsection C, subsection 1A says you can't do this. So qualifications come into some stuff, and we still may need some government help when that happens. So that's what we're looking at. The government goes ahead and tries to make all of that happen, make the problems go away. They're the referee. Now remember, they're the best referee that we vote for. So macroeconomics, we talk a lot about this because macroeconomics used to be called political economics. Why? Because macroeconomics, if you remember, the government provides our economic environment. In microeconomics, we break down and see what's in that environment. But the government does that, as does the Federal Reserve. So, we elect a president, we elect Congress, the president selects the members of the Federal Reserve, and the Senate approves them to be on the Federal Reserve. So, you've got all of this focused in to the people we elect. So fiscal policies, monetary policies, that's what we'll get into a little bit more in macroeconomics. All right, so here's what we should look like. Remember our comparisons. Historically, socialism never works. Capitalism historically does work. And that's all for this section.